The world is full of fascinating cultures, stunning landscapes, and toilets that seem determined to send your porcelain throne expectations into an existential crisis. But as it turns out, there are some places even the most intrepid visa-wielding American can't just waltz into. We're diving headfirst into the geopolitical deep end where travel advisories come with a side of seriously, don't even think about it. We're talking about countries so off-limits they make a weekend at your in-laws look like a tropical getaway. So, pack your metaphorical hazmat suit, grab your most bewildered facial expression, and let's get into it, shall we? First up on our whirlwind tour of nope, not happening destinations is none other than North Korea. You know, that charming little nation known for its vibrant tourism industry? Just kidding. North Korea makes a convent look like a rave. This is a country that's basically a masterclass in isolationism. They've got more walls than a house renovation show hosted by a sentient hammer. And for Americans, getting in is about as likely as finding a unicorn riding a Roomba through Times Square, so unless you're Dennis Rodman, you might want to rethink your travel plans. We're talking decades of political tension, nuclear standoffs, and a general "you stay on your side, we'll stay on ours and build a personality cult around our leader" kind of vibe. It's the kind of relationship where even a strongly worded letter could trigger an international incident. Now I know what you're thinking, there must be some way for an American to visit North Korea, and you'd be right. Technically, it's not impossible. But it's about as easy as performing open-heart surgery on yourself with a rusty spork. You'll need special permission from the North Korean government, a tour group that's more tightly controlled than a Beyoncé concert, and the willingness to accept that your every move will be watched more closely than a toddler with a fistful of glitter. In short, unless you're Donald Trump and have a bizarrely chummy relationship with Kim Jong-un, your chances of visiting North Korea are about as high as me winning an Olympic gold medal in swimming. Next up on our places. Americans aren't exactly welcome to is Iran, a country that boasts a history so rich and ancient, it makes the Roman Empire look like a bunch of toddlers playing dress-up in togas. We're talking millennia of culture, stunning architecture, and enough Persian rugs to carpet the entire state of Rhode Island. But, and you knew there was a but coming, didn't you? The relationship between the US and Iran? Let's just say it's more complicated than a Rubik's Cube. We're talking decades of political and religious tensions, sanctions, and enough finger-pointing to make a kindergarten teacher lose their mind. So, if you're planning a trip, you might want to give it a few more years. Now, before you start practicing your Farsi and brushing up on your Persian poetry, let's be clear. For Americans, visiting Iran isn't as simple as booking a flight and hoping for the best. In fact, it's more like trying to win the lottery while riding a unicycle on a tightrope over a pit of hungry crocodiles. Possible, technically, advisable, not so much. You see, the US State Department has this handy little thing called a Level 4 travel advisory for Iran, which basically translates to, seriously dude, are you allergic to not being detained? Because that's how you get detained. And they're not wrong. So, maybe hold off on those travel plans for now. Right, Syria. You know, that place you see on the news and think, well, that looks thoroughly unpleasant. And you'd be right, because Syria's idea of a relaxing beach vacation involves dodging mortar fire and trying not to step on a landmine. It's basically the world's most dangerous game of hopscotch, and nobody wins. Seriously, the US State Department has issued its highest level of travel advisory: do not travel. It's not reconsider travel or pack extra socks, it's do not travel. They might as well write it in Klingon because the message is clear: stay the hell away. Now I know what you're thinking, you beautiful, cynical bastard, you've painted a pretty grim picture. And to that I say, you're goddamn right I have, because the reality is, Syria is facing a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. We're talking millions displaced, infrastructure in ruins, and a cat population that's probably more heavily armed than your local police department. The US government, in a rare moment of clarity, has strongly advised against all travel to Syria. And when I say strongly, I mean they've basically built a metaphorical wall of no trespassing signs around the entire country. They're not messing around, folks. This isn't the time to test the limits of your travel insurance or see if your Instagram followers will be impressed by your daring vacation choices. I suggest you cross Syria off your travel bucket list. Alright, buckle up folks, because our next stop on this whirlwind tour of places you really shouldn't be vacationing is Afghanistan. And let me tell you, Afghanistan makes Syria look like a relaxing spa getaway. We're talking about a country where the primary export is instability and the national pastime is dodging drone strikes. Now, I know Afghanistan has a rich history and stunning natural beauty, but unfortunately it's also got a bit of a security problem. And by a bit, I mean it's got more security problems than a Zoom meeting at the Pentagon. We're talking terrorism, civil unrest, and a government that makes your local homeowners association look like the freaking United Nations. It's a mess, a beautiful, terrifying mess. The US State Department, in its infinite wisdom, has slapped Afghanistan with a big, fat, do not travel advisory. And frankly, it's a miracle they didn't just write abandon all hope, ye who enter in giant flaming letters across the country's borders. They're basically saying, look, we're not saying you're gonna die if you go to Afghanistan, but we're also not saying that. And if that's not enough to deter you, consider this. The infrastructure in Afghanistan is about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. So even if you avoid the landmines and gunfire, you're still dealing with roads that would make a Roman chariot driver weep, and an airport that's basically a glorified goat pasture. So, unless you're a war correspondent with a death wish or a goat with a strong constitution, avoid Afghanistan like the plague. Trust me, there are easier ways to get your adrenaline fix. Like, I don't know, skydiving, or swimming with sharks. Alright, let's move from a literal dumpster fire to one that's more metaphorical. This week we're talking about Venezuela, a country that was once synonymous with stunning beaches and vibrant culture. Now, it's more known for hyperinflation, political turmoil, and a distinct lack of toilet paper. It's like going from a 5-star resort to a 1-star motel with questionable plumbing. See, Venezuela is going through a bit of a rough patch, and by rough patch, I mean it's currently starring in its own tragicomic telenovela titled How to Tank an Economy in 5 Easy Steps. Hyperinflation's so bad you practically need a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Now, the US State Department, in its quest to keep you from booking a one-way ticket to a disaster zone, has issued a Level 4 travel advisory for Venezuela. That's right, it's the dreaded do not travel warning, the travel equivalent of a skull and crossbones. They're basically saying, look, we're not your mom, but we're also not going to be held responsible when you end up on the evening news because you decided to go rogue in Caracas. And honestly, who can blame them? The US Embassy in Caracas has been operating with a skeleton crew for years due to the deteriorating situation. So unless you have a burning desire to experience firsthand what happens when a country's infrastructure goes full-on Mad Max, I suggest you maybe skip the trip to Venezuela for now. There are plenty of other beautiful and fascinating places to visit in the world. Ah, Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Yet for decades it might as well have been on the moon for American tourists. After the Cuban Revolution, the US slapped an embargo on the island nation. In 2014, Obama announced a thaw in relations, easing travel restrictions. But, like a mojito left out in the sun, that thaw didn't last. The Trump administration rolled back many of those changes. As of 2025, Cuba remains a tantalizing possibility shrouded in bureaucratic red tape. So, where do things stand now? Well, it's complicated. The Biden administration has eased some restrictions, but the embargo remains largely in place. This means that while you can technically travel to Cuba, you can't just book a flight on Expedia and pack your Hawaiian shirt. You'll need a specific reason for your trip, like supporting the Cuban people or engaging in cultural exchanges. And no, wanting to drink mojitos on the beach doesn't count. Plus, even if you jump through all the legal hoops, there are still logistical hurdles. American credit cards are often useless in Cuba, so you'll need to bring a wad of cash. So, while Cuba remains a fascinating and culturally rich destination, it's not exactly the easiest place for Americans to visit in 2025. Russia, the land of borscht, ballet, and well, increasingly strained relations with the West. Remember the Cold War? Yeah, it turns out it wasn't just a catchy name for a Tom Clancy novel, it was a real thing, and its icy grip still lingers over US-Russia relations. For years, getting a Russian visa was a bit like playing geopolitical roulette. You might get lucky and breeze through the process, or you might find yourself trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare worthy of Kafka. And after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, things went from frosty to downright frigid. The US, along with many Western countries, imposed sanctions on Russia, making travel there increasingly difficult for Americans. Flights were canceled, visas became harder to get, and the whole situation felt a bit like someone had dropped an Iron Curtain 2.0. So, what does this mean for American travelers in 2025? You'll likely be watching those documentaries about the Trans-Siberian Railway from your couch. Securing a visa is about as likely as finding a unicorn riding a bear. Western credit cards are often useless, flights are limited and expensive, and there's the risk of geopolitical tensions. 2025 is probably not the year to tick Russia off your travel bucket list. For now, it seems like Russia will remain a distant dream for many American travelers. Nestled between Russia and Poland, Belarus often gets overlooked. It's like the middle child of Eastern Europe, often forgotten, except when it's causing trouble. And boy, has Belarus been causing trouble lately. See, Belarus has the distinct honor of being dubbed Europe's last dictatorship, ruled with an iron fist by Alexander Lukashenko, a man who makes Vladimir Putin look like a cuddly teddy bear in comparison. Think of him as the love child of Stalin, and a particularly grumpy walrus. That's the level of charm we're dealing with here. In recent years, Lukashenko has cracked down on dissent, rigged elections, and generally made life a living hell for anyone who dares to disagree with him. Protests have been met with brutal force, journalists have been jailed, and the whole country feels like it's teetering on the brink of, well, something not very pleasant. So, where does that leave American travelers? Well, let's just say that Belarus is not exactly rolling out the welcome mat. In fact, it's more like they've erected a barbed wire fence and posted armed guards. The US government has issued a level 4 travel advisory for Belarus, which is their way of saying, seriously, don't even think about it. The risk of getting caught up in protests, arbitrarily detained, or otherwise finding yourself on the wrong side of Lukashenko's regime is simply too high. Plus, even if you somehow manage to avoid those pitfalls, Belarus isn't exactly a tourist paradise. The internet is heavily censored, surveillance is rampant, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a decent cup of coffee. So, unless you've got a burning desire to experience life under a dictatorship firsthand, I'd recommend giving Belarus a wide berth in 2025. Trust me, your freedom and your sanity will thank you for it. Do you think Sudan would be on the list? A country rich in history and culture, but one that continues to face significant economic and humanitarian challenges? Honestly, I barely remember them from geography class, and fair enough, but let's refresh those memories, shall we? Sudan's had a rough go of it. We're talking decades of internal conflict, dictatorships, you name it. And just when you thought things might be looking up, bam, 2019 hits. Omar al-Bashir, their longtime dictator, gets ousted. Sounds promising, right? Democracy, here we come. Not so fast. Turns out, getting rid of a dictator is the easy part. Actually governing a country that's been through the ringer, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And Sudan, unfortunately, is swimming in a sea of those fish. So, what does all this political turmoil mean for your average American tourist itching to see, well, whatever Sudan has to offer? Let's just say the State Department isn't exactly handing out welcome mats. They've slapped a big fat do not travel advisory on the country, and honestly, can you blame them? We're talking a place where political instability is basically the national pastime. You've got armed groups running around, protests popping up like daisies, and a government that's about as stable as a unicycle on a tightrope. Not exactly the recipe for a relaxing vacation, is it? So, unless you're a war correspondent with a death wish, or you're really into trying to navigate a country where the political climate changes faster than the weather, maybe give Sudan a miss, at least for now. Myanmar, land of golden pagodas, lush landscapes, and a military coup? Yep, you heard that right. Remember back in 2021 when the military decided they missed being in charge? Good times. For them maybe. For the people of Myanmar? Not so much. Protests erupted, the government cracked down, and suddenly, this once promising tourist destination became a no-go zone. And when I say crack down, I mean it. We're talking serious human rights violations here, folks. The kind that make you want to donate to Amnesty International and then go hug a diplomat. It's a mess, a real shame, and a stark reminder that sometimes paradise can turn into a political powder keg faster than you can say Aung San Suu Kyi. So where does that leave you, dear American traveler, eager to explore the wonders of Myanmar? Well, unless you're packing a flak jacket and a PhD in Southeast Asian political science, probably at home, The State Department, in their infinite wisdom, has issued a Level 4 travel advisory for Myanmar. That's their way of saying, seriously, don't even think about it. And honestly, they're right. Traveling to a country in the midst of a political crisis is like trying to sunbathe in a hurricane. It's just not a good idea. The risks are high, the situation is volatile, and there's a very real chance you could end up as a pawn in a much bigger geopolitical game. Make sure to watch the next video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on what's coming next. Stay safe, stay informed, and choose your travel destinations wisely.